Sean Diddy Combs was transferred to the federal prison at Fort Dix, New Jersey yesterday, where he will start to serve the rest of his 50-month sentence.
After 13 months in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, watching his empire crumble from behind bars since that September 2024 arrest, Diddy finally got his wish. His lawyers had specifically requested Fort Dix.
Late October 2025, the move happened fast. One day he was still a headline inside a holding facility. The next day reports say he was placed on a transfer route to a federal institution in New Jersey, a place his legal team had been pushing for, arguing it would be better for visitation and programming. Then an intake photo hit the public. Not a glamour shot, not a polished image. A flat, unforgiving frame under prison lighting hair, noticeably grayer, face heavier, eyes carrying the kind of tired that doesn't come from travel, it comes from time. And that's when the story changed online. Because the moment people saw that image, the curiosity didn't stop at, where is he now? It turned into something darker. What does his life look like in there minute by minute? What does behind bars mean when you're used to controlling every room you enter? And now with reported footage and accounts circulating, showing him in standard issue clothing, moving through routine assignments, blending into a system that doesn't bend, the fascination has gone viral, not because it's new, but because it's real life stripped down to routine. Now, quick question for you, be honest. Do you think prison actually humbles celebrities, or does it just force them to adapt? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want breakdowns that stay focused on structure, receipts, and what's actually being reported, not fan fiction, hit subscribe. Because this story isn't just about where he is, it's about what the system does to someone who lived off power and access. Here's the part most people don't understand. When you hear federal prison, you picture rows of locked cells, steel doors, isolation. But this New Jersey facility has a different setup. According to descriptions from former inmates and public sources, much of the housing is dorm-style open units, bunk beds, shared space, constant movement. No private cell to shut the world out. Just rows of bunks, bags tucked under frames, a room full of men trying to exist in the same air. Some dorms are smaller, a handful of bunks. Others are massive open bays where dozens of people sleep inside one long, echoing space. And if that sounds like a detail that doesn't matter, it matters more than almost anything, because dorm housing changes everything. Noise doesn't end, privacy doesn't exist, and reputation, whether you're famous or not, doesn't buy quiet. Reportedly, the day begins before sunrise, not with comfort, with compliance, lights, movement, lines. Head count is the first reality check, the system verifying you're still there, still in place, still under control. From that moment forward, your day belongs to the schedule, not to you. Breakfast comes early, institutional trays. Whatever is served is what you eat. It isn't bad in a cinematic way, it's worse. It's plain, forgettable, fuel, and then the work detail kicks in. Federal prisons run on labor assignments. If you're in that system, you work not as a career, but as a requirement. And according to reports tied to this specific case, he's been linked to assignments that include laundry operations and time around a chapel or media library area. Laundry sounds small until you imagine it. Industrial machines, heavy loads, endless sorting, uniforms, linens, sheets, the kind of repetitive work that makes the hours feel longer because nothing changes from one load to the next. The pay is minimal pennies. The point isn't money, it's structure. And then there's the other reported duty: distributing materials, handling movies or religious items, operating inside a quieter room compared to harsher assignments. People online keep calling that better. And maybe it is. But better in prison doesn't mean comfortable. It means less miserable. What's consistent across accounts is the control. Head counts can happen again and again during work, during movement, during the middle of a task. You stop, you stand, you wait. The system checks you like inventory. That's the real punishment. Time becomes chopped into monitored pieces. Later in the day, there's limited recreation. A yard, a track, courts. A TV room with basic access. No internet, no scrolling, no algorithm, no checking the narrative. Just whatever the facility allows. when it allows it. Phone calls are where things get even more serious. In federal facilities, calls aren't casual, they're regulated, monitored, rules are strict, and the punishment for breaking them is immediate. And according to reports around this case, there was an early incident tied to phone procedure that led to sanctions, including temporary loss of privileges. Different parties have framed the details differently, but the pattern is familiar. One mistake and your access disappears. That's what people don't get about prison life. It's not one dramatic event, it's a chain of small rules, and the consequences stack up fast. And the nights? Nights don't reset you. They don't heal you. Lights out is mandatory, but silence is not. In dorm housing, sleep is shared. Snoring, footsteps, someone coughing, someone whispering, someone up because their mind won't shut off. Then the clock turns, and the same morning hits again. This is why the intake photo mattered, because it looked like the moment the reality finally landed, not the headlines, not the court talk, not the PR language. Just the face of someone realizing the schedule doesn't care who you were outside. There's another layer too. Time. Public reporting has discussed projected release timelines and how they can shift good behavior credits, administrative changes, disciplinary actions, program eligibility. Sometimes dates move, and the public doesn't get a clean explanation. Inside the system, small decisions have big effects. And then there's the rehabilitation angle. Reports have linked him to interest in programming that could reduce time if completed, including drug treatment options that for eligible inmates can shorten a sentence. But those programs aren't automatic. They have requirements, waiting lists, evaluations, and one thing above all, a clean institutional record, which means in a place where rules are everything, every infraction becomes more than a punishment. It becomes a threat to the only leverage you have left, time. And that brings us to the reason this footage and these details keep spreading. Because people aren't just watching a celebrity do time, they're watching a person go from controlling the environment to being controlled by it. A number, a bunk, a line, a schedule. And when you understand that, you realize why the next chapter matters. Because what happens inside these walls isn't just routine, it's pressure. And pressure reveals patterns. The longer someone stays inside a federal facility, the more they learn an uncomfortable truth. Prison doesn't care about your past, but the people inside do. That's where the real adjustment begins. Because once the intake phase ends and the routine settles in, attention shifts, not from guards, from other inmates. Dorm-style housing means nothing stays invisible for long. Everyone watches everyone. Patterns get noticed, habits get discussed, and status, whether earned on the outside or not, becomes something you either manage carefully or pay for. Former inmates who've spoken publicly about this type of facility describe it the same way. The first few weeks are about survival, learning when to talk, when not to, how to move without drawing unnecessary focus. And when someone enters with global name recognition, that learning curve gets steeper. Reports from individuals familiar with this environment have said the same thing repeatedly: being famous doesn't protect you. If anything, it adds pressure. Because people test boundaries. They see how you carry yourself, whether you try to stand apart or blend in. One former inmate who spent years inside a similar federal institution described it bluntly. Your fate depends on how you act when no one owes you respect. And that's where discipline becomes everything. In open dorms, conflict rarely starts with shouting. It starts with small things. A look held too long, a comment taken the wrong way, a sense that someone thinks they're above the rules everyone else follows. That's why low-profile behavior isn't just advice, it's survival strategy. According to public commentary from former inmates and prison analysts, inmates who enter quietly, follow instructions, and don't try to leverage outside status usually avoid serious trouble. Those who don't learn fast, and trouble doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's administrative. Phone privileges revoked, commissary access restricted, program eligibility delayed. Those consequences matter far more than people realize, because inside federal custody, small penalties snowball. Take commissary, for example. Commissary isn't luxury, it's control. Snacks, hygiene items, basic comforts. The ability to supplement institutional meals that many former inmates describe as inconsistent or low quality. Spending limits exist, and funds come from outside accounts. But access itself becomes a psychological lifeline. Lose that access, and days feel longer. Lose phone access, and isolation deepens. And according to reporting tied to this case, there were early disciplinary issues related to phone procedure that resulted in temporary loss of privileges. Different explanations were offered publicly, clarifications issued. But inside the system, intent matters less than outcome. A violation is a violation. And once it's logged, it follows you. That matters because of something else that's been discussed quietly but consistently in coverage. Program eligibility. Federal prisons offer certain rehabilitative programs that can reduce sentence time, but only if strict conditions are met. Clean conduct, documented need, verified history, and consistent compliance. The most discussed of these programs is RDAP, the Residential Drug Abuse Program. It's often misunderstood. RDAP isn't a class you sign up for and finish casually. It's one of the Bureau of Prisons' most structured treatment programs. Inmates live separately from general population. They participate in daily therapy sessions, group accountability, cognitive behavioral work, no shortcuts. Completion can reduce a sentence significantly, sometimes by up to a year. That's why interest in RDAP gets so much attention in high-profile cases. But here's what doesn't get talked about enough. Getting in is hard. Staying in is harder. Eligibility requires documented substance abuse within a specific time frame before arrest. Evaluations are done. Records are reviewed. Waiting lists are long. And once enrolled, every action is scrutinized. Any disciplinary issue, phone violations, contraband, failure to participate fully can lead to removal. That's why early missteps inside a facility raise eyebrows. Not because they're dramatic, but because they signal risk. And risk inside federal custody translates directly to time. Former prison administrators have explained this dynamic openly. Inmates hoping for early release incentives must demonstrate good institutional adjustment. That phrase appears repeatedly in internal evaluations. Good adjustment means following rules without exception, respecting staff directives, avoiding conflict, participating sincerely in assigned programming. There is no margin for celebrity behavior. That's where the psychological shift becomes visible. According to individuals who've served time alongside high-profile inmates, the real struggle isn't fear, it's ego. Letting go of identity, accepting instruction from people younger than you, waiting your turn, standing in line. Because prison doesn't strip power violently. It removes it systematically. Every request requires approval. Every privilege is conditional. Every day is observed. And when you've lived a life where influence opened doors instantly, that reversal can feel suffocating. Some inmates break under that pressure. They act out. They violate rules. They blame the system. Others adapt. They go quiet. They focus on routine. They shrink their world to manageable pieces. According to accounts tied to this case, observers inside have described him as compliant, keeping his head down, following schedules, avoiding unnecessary attention. But they've also noted moments of frustration early on, which is not unusual. Adjustment isn't linear. There's also the reality of money inside prison, a topic former inmates speak about carefully. While bribes and illegal activity are officially prohibited, informal economies exist everywhere. Services, favors, bartering. Most inmates rely on trust networks built over time. New arrivals don't enter those systems immediately and shouldn't try. Former inmates warn that attempting to buy comfort too quickly attracts attention the wrong kind. That's why patience becomes a form of protection. Visitation adds another layer of complexity. Visits are tightly regulated. Physical contact is limited. One embrace at the beginning, one at the end. Everything else monitored. A hand held too long can end a visit immediately. For inmates with large families, these rules turn emotional moments into carefully timed exchanges. Publicly, family support has been visible: social media messages, birthday tributes, statements of love. Privately, visits carry weight. They remind inmates of life outside and how far away it still is. Holidays inside federal custody amplify that feeling. Meals change slightly. Decorations might appear briefly, but the sense of pause is temporary. The schedule never stops. And for inmates watching years stretch ahead, holidays can feel heavier than ordinary days. That's why release dates matter so much and why even small shifts spark intense reaction. In this case, reporting has noted changes to projected release timing without detailed public explanation. That happens more often than people think. Administrative recalculations, disciplinary records, program eligibility, everything feeds into the final number, and that number becomes an anchor. Too far away, and hope weakens. Close enough, and discipline sharpens. That's the paradox of federal prison time. The closer freedom feels, the more careful you have to become. Which brings us to the turning point, the moment when routine stops being punishment and starts becoming strategy. Because inside a system built on control, the only way forward is consistency. And the next phase of this story isn't about where he sleeps or what he eats. It's about whether structure leads to reflection or whether pressure exposes patterns that never really change. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because the people watching him most closely now aren't the public. They're the ones inside. By the time weeks turn into months inside a federal facility, something subtle happens. The noise fades into the background. The schedule stops feeling new, and the mind starts doing the thing prison was designed to force reflection. Not the kind that comes from choice, but the kind that comes from repetition. Former inmates often describe this phase as the most dangerous and the most revealing. Not because of violence, but because this is when people stop performing. The adrenaline wears off. The outside world feels distant, and whatever habits someone brought in with them start to surface. That's why programs like RDAP exist. Not as favors, not as shortcuts, but as pressure chambers. According to federal guidelines, RDAP is structured as a therapeutic community. Inmates live together, work together, attend daily group sessions. Accountability isn't abstract, it's enforced socially. Participants call each other out. Excuses get challenged. Deflection doesn't last long. This isn't therapy in a private office. It's therapy in front of men who've already hit bottom. And according to multiple prison consultants, that's exactly why many inmates don't finish. The program demands vulnerability, real vulnerability, talking openly about addiction patterns, control issues, rationalizations, the behaviors that led to incarceration in the first place. For someone used to managing image and narrative, that environment can be brutal. You can't delegate introspection. And while public statements have framed enrollment in rehabilitative programming as commitment to growth, internal reality works differently. Participation is monitored. Engagement is evaluated. Facilitators document behavior. Missed sessions, resistance, or lack of sincerity can result in removal. That's why disciplinary history matters so much. Every phone violation, every rule infraction, every argument with staff. It all gets weighed when determining whether someone is a good fit for continued participation. And here's the part most viewers don't hear about. RDAP doesn't replace work duties, it adds to them. Participants still report to job assignments, still attend counts, still follow the same rigid daily schedule as everyone else. The program consumes hours emotionally and mentally on top of physical exhaustion. That combination breaks people. Some inmates drop out voluntarily, others get removed, and some never apply because they know they won't make it through. But those who do complete it describe something similar. Prison stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like confrontation. Confrontation with patterns, control, entitlement, avoidance. All of it comes under scrutiny. Former inmates who've served time in RDAP units say there's no hiding. Your peers know when you're lying. Staff notice when your participation feels rehearsed. And status, fame, money, outside influence becomes irrelevant. Inside those walls, everyone's there because something failed. That's where the debate around this case intensifies. Is participation a strategic move for sentence reduction? Or is it a genuine attempt to change? Some argue those things aren't mutually exclusive. Motivation doesn't have to be pure to produce real outcomes. But intention matters when pressure rises. And pressure always rises. Because RDAP has strict disqualification triggers. Any drug or alcohol-related incident, immediate removal. Contraband removal. Failure to engage removal. Disciplinary violations removal. Once removed, re-entry is rare. And that's why reports of early rule issues sparked so much discussion. Not because they were scandalous, but because they hinted at difficulty adjusting to constraint. Former wardens have explained this clearly. Early conduct sets the tone for everything that follows. Staff watch closely, files get updated. Opportunities narrow or expand based on those first impressions. That's the institutional reality. Then there's the mental health layer. Legal analysts and former judges have pointed out that substance abuse treatment alone doesn't address everything. Mood disorders, impulse control, long-term behavior patterns. Without structured psychiatric care, therapy has limits. Federal sentencing allows and sometimes recommends mental health treatment alongside incarceration. But participation, again, depends on compliance. You can't demand treatment on your terms. Inside prison, the system decides when and how help is delivered. And that loss of control is the hardest part. Inmates who've lived this phase describe nights where sleep comes easily and nights where it doesn't come at all. Thoughts loop, regrets surface, anger simmers. The mind replays moments that can't be fixed. That's when people either harden or soften. Observers inside facilities say you can see the difference. Some inmates isolate, they stop engaging, they withdraw. Others lean into routine, work, therapy, structure. They shrink their focus to survive the day. And that survival strategy shapes outcomes. Because prison doesn't reward emotion, it rewards predictability. Staff don't care how sorry you sound, they care how consistently you follow rules. That's why the idea of redemption inside prison is misunderstood. Redemption isn't declared, it's documented. It shows up in files, behavior logs, evaluations, completion certificates. And when release eventually comes, whether early or on schedule, those documents follow you. Which brings us to the question that hangs over everything. If someone emerges from this system sober, compliant, structured, is that change real? Or is it simply adaptation? Former inmates argue both can be true. Prison doesn't erase personality, it compresses it. Whatever remains after years of constraint, that's the core. And the reason this story keeps evolving is because people aren't just watching time pass. They're watching whether pressure reshapes identity or simply pauses it. Because when the door eventually opens, the structure disappears. And what's left has to stand on its own. That's the test that no program can guarantee. And it's the one that decides whether this chapter becomes an ending or just an intermission. When people talk about prison, they often frame it as an ending, a fall, a full stop. But inside the federal system, time doesn't move like that. It stretches, it narrows, and eventually it points forward whether someone is ready or not. By this stage, the routine is no longer shocking. It's normalized. Wake up before dawn, stand for count, work assignment, program hours, another count, lights out, day after day. The same structure, the same limits, the same absence of choice. And that's when the real outcome of incarceration begins to take shape. Because prison doesn't decide who you become after release. It only decides how much pressure you experience before that moment. Former inmates who've completed long federal sentences describe release as the most disorienting part of the entire process. Not confinement freedom. After years of rigid structure, the sudden return of choice feels overwhelming. Inside, everything is decided for you. Outside, nothing is. That's why post-release supervision exists. Federal sentences don't end at the gate. Supervised release can last years. Regular check-ins, drug testing, travel restrictions, miss an appointment, and consequences return fast. The system doesn't fully let go. For inmates who complete intensive programs like RDAP, expectations are even higher. Continued sobriety, continued compliance, no slip-ups. Because early release doesn't mean erase consequences, it means increased scrutiny. And that's where the stakes become clear. If rehabilitation is real, it has to survive without structure, without daily counts, without mandatory therapy circles, without staff watching every move. Some former inmates succeed. They rebuild quietly, Others struggle. Old habits return once pressure fades. The system has seen both outcomes countless times. That's why experts caution against premature conclusions. An intake photo doesn't tell you who someone will be in 5 years. A clean conduct record doesn't guarantee transformation. And public statements don't equal internal change. What matters is consistency over time without cameras. This case has drawn attention not because it's unique, but because it highlights a universal truth. Power insulates people until it doesn't. And when it disappears, what remains is tested. Inside federal prison, everyone starts at zero. No entourage, no influence, no shortcuts, just behavior. And behavior is the only currency that counts. As legal appeals continue and release timelines remain uncertain, one reality stays fixed every day: inside is a choice between resistance and adaptation, between compliance and consequence, between using structure as a crutch or as a tool. The system doesn't care which one you choose, but the outcome does, because when the sentence ends, whether sooner or later, the public story fades. The headlines move on, and the individual steps back into a world that remembers everything but waits to see nothing. That's the final irony of incarceration. It erases your voice while it lasts, then hands it back when it matters most. And at that point, there's no script left to follow. Only patterns, only decisions, only accountability. So the question isn't whether prison changes someone. The question is whether they carry that change with them when no one is forcing it. If you found this breakdown valuable and want more evidence-based, long-form stories that go beyond surface headlines, make sure you're subscribed. And let me ask you one final thing. Do you believe rehabilitation inside prison can truly last once freedom returns? Or does the system simply pause behavior until the pressure is gone? Drop your thoughts in the comments.